Talking God with Uncle Luke. This week, the social justice warrior. Come on in, let's check it out together. Luke chapter 18, verse 1 to, I forget. Come on in.
All the bubbas of the world, we got one mission in mind.
Welcome to the Biblical Channel. Always glad somebody's showing up because here at the Biblical Channel, we are absolutely convinced that we all need to wring the chamois of life out to the best that we possibly can. And old Uncle Luke here is going to be one of those sources of great information. Unbelievable how relevant, Uncle Luke writing 2,000 years ago can actually capture things that are so relevant today, mostly because we don't change very much. Human beings do not change very much. The same concerns that existed now or existed then exist now. All of that is true. But anyhow, to get you to read your Bible, say your prayers, get together, talk God, the Bible has some amazing content. I would say original content. Like very few other source documents, really push comes to shove. It depends on, who is your authority for good conversations. Where do you go to get good conversations going? Well, the Bible is just that. And here at the Biblical Channel, we just feel like it's time to get from the bullshit to the holy shit and do the holy shit right, to get our hearts to say, my soul magnifies the Lord, like Mary said, that her spirit rejoices in God, her Savior, like Mary said. Well, anyhow, let us go with no further ado right into this text. And it's a doozy. It's a text that actually jumps right into a scenario where there is a widowed woman, a pretty vulnerable person in any society. A widowed woman goes before a judge and she says, give me justice against my adversary. Now, the text around this tells us, and the story is really couched in the hands of this unjust judge or unrighteous judge. The judge is a judge who does not, care for God. This is also a judge that doesn't care for man, neither feared God nor respected man. We're told about the judge, and we're not told that once, we're told that twice. So that is the primary bearing of the story, and the primary bearing of the story on this widowed woman's plight for justice. And what's interesting is that the judge, who does not fear God and does not fear man, he does not doubt her justice, that she is right or in the right. That is not the contemplation of the judge. The contemplation of the judge, though, seems to be centered around just a selfish fact of he's getting tired of hearing her, which means that she keeps coming back with the same case, looking for justice against her adversary. It's only when she wears him down that he finally says, I'll give you justice. Notice he doesn't say that you've convinced me of your justice. It's just that he decides to give her justice. All right. Well, that is the heart and soul of this story that is going to give shape to a larger story. But let us just talk about the idea of justice, because justice is a huge topic today. It is the topic of the, of the both the old part of the Bible and the new part of the Bible too. In fact, I would say that our ideas and concerns with justice have come from the pages of the Bible. They really don't come from any other source. I don't want to get into the weeds of argument, but I'm just saying that the Bible, in both the Old and New section, drum into our minds that we need to be concerned about justice correctly. And that one of our chief problems as human beings is that we mess up justice all the time. This scenario where a judge is responsible for doling out justice and can hold back giving justice to a widowed woman until she just beats him down, that is the hallmarks of our society then. And unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, that is the hallmarks of our society now. Justice is one of those issues that drives us crazy. It's like sex, sex drives us crazy. Justice drives us crazy. Just like sex leads to passion, so does justice. Justice leads immediately to passions. And passions, lead us to, well, honestly, passions lead us to all kinds of emotional swings, etc. It is the very substance of what can drive us absolutely crazy. And so justice does drive us crazy. I would think just, pretty similar. Simon Birch once said that sex drives people crazy. And I agree with him. Simon Birch, I think you were right on it, man. Because sex, takes us straight to passion, and passion always takes us to cray town. So justice, does lead us to passionate feelings. It is the substance of oftentimes people absolutely losing their marbles, and rightfully so. Rightfully so. It's a very, very delicate subject. But here's what's surprising about the topic of justice. Very few people actually define what they mean when they're talking about justice. Very few people that I ever hear talking about justice takes the time to explain what they mean about justice. And I guarantee when somebody assumes that we all know what we mean about justice, the conversation is going to get weird, and it's going to get wildly out of control. And quickly, people are not going to be agreeing with one another because the definitions of the things have not been set. Justice needs to be talked about just as to what in the world do you mean? Because I think there is a great difference between earthly justice that we can get accomplished, and then there's cosmic justice. And I do not think we can accomplish cosmic justice. I just think it's way beyond us. We're not capable, nor should we even attempt to be capable, in this area for good reason. But anyhow, just justice is the centerpiece of this scenario with this old orphan widow, but it's going to raise up the issue of all social justice, which let's just talk about that, right? Social justice is an oxymoron. The word social is never needed for justice because that's all there is social justice. All justice is about the social networking of human beings with one another and what those human beings have decided is just and unjust behavior towards one another. And that is the substance of laws that eventually get made so that justice actually can happen. But there's no actual need for social justice because all justice is social justice. All justice is about how we agree as a group of people to a certain set of norms and guidelines and procedures that, are the substance of society. So all of this is very natural. And that's what, should be, in the conversational swing of things. And this whole topic of justice, man, I get excited about it because it's very fun to think about. So what happens when people get very passionate and they haven't defined justice is often that people just, get wildly excited about retribution. Retribution in the hands of the angered is always going to be a dangerous scenario. It's the mob think. It's the group think that just leads to tirades. And truthfully, at the heart and soul of the issue might be, a legitimate issue. But if justice leads to our passions without any real definitions, it leads to a retribution in the hands of the angered. And that is never going to get us the results that we actually can measure and say, okay, well, justice was served. And really the rise of natural government is just the rise of these problems surrounding justice that emerge naturally between human beings. Human beings living in a group, living in context with one another are always going to press in on one another. And when they press in on one another, the issue of justice is going to be the conversational point. What is just and what is unjust? And that needs to be sorted out. And that's the rise of natural government. But remember, all government is merely a necessary evil. It arises out of our evils. It does not arise out of our goodness. Government is necessary, but it's also there because of our evils and our evils surrounding justice. Also, probably needs to be said that we can hardly have a conversation about justice without having a conversation about equality, because when equality feels trampled on, that too brings about justice around the corner. And equality is one of those issues that we need to define as well. Well, let us hold off on just that definition, and let us just try to work out what the problems are so that we can kind of get our head wrapped around what a definition of justice really is. And so it has to be noted, as a human being that can read, if you read back into the pages of history, that historically governments have had a problem with partiality. Human beings have a problem with partiality, and governments themselves have a big problem with partiality, meaning that they give partial or unfair treatment towards others. That can be negative and that can be positive, and that gives rise to the feeling of unjust behavior or unjust actions. And when government is showing partiality to one group or another, it is just a scene ripe for problems, all kinds of problems. And so the American Revolution that we had 240 some years ago was not some sort of pissing contest with England. It was the establishment of a government, knowing that government has a problem with partiality. It was the establishment of a government that the people could actually control. And when the people actually control the government, well, then the way that we control government is making the equality and the equal treatment of everybody under the same banner of laws. So the law, when a government is actually run by people, it is the people that apply the law equally, okay, with no partiality. The law needs to be written to be a good law, and then it needs to be applicable to all people. So that's really the definition of justice that we find in the American Revolution, that we find in the construct of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And I just have to give a commercial break and a shout out to say that all of this comes from the pages of the Bible as well. I'm not saying that somebody couldn't get there without the Bible, but the Bible gave rise to all of these issues needing to be taken seriously like no other philosophy, no other religion, no other socioeconomic group that had ever lived in the lands. And historically, governments have been the root cause of human beings' trouble with one another, because those governments end up showing partiality. And so the American Revolution is very good to contrast with the French Revolution, because they both happened at a very close period of time to one another, and they both had similar concerns and similar ideas, but they had terribly different functions and results. In the American Revolution, the rule of law was at the centerpiece of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution that later came next. And that also weighed, heavily on the minds of those who were involved in the American Revolution. Even the English, I have to give them a lot of credit. Even the English were very much aware of the need for a rule of law. And they did not dare to try to go too far past the rule of law and the commonly understood, application of the law equally. But the colonists knew that we could do even better than what England thought of. And it was just time for, England to go back to her own island and manage her own affairs and get out of the affairs of a people that were, far away. But anyhow, the rule of law is the centerpiece, and impartiality versus partiality is also the centerpiece of due process, fair trials, separation of powers, limited power, checks and balances. Compare that to the French Revolution, where you had this group called Representatives on Missions that later became the group called the Commission on Public Safety, and they literally traveled with a guillotine and from area to area. And they made their judgments, and they made their judgments quick, and there were no laws that could keep them from making their judgments. and using their guillotine immediately. And ladies and gentlemen, the French Revolution was a bloody and unjust affair. It was a mob rule. It was a ridiculousness. And those similar concerns and similar ideals that the French Revolution had with the American Revolution quickly turned into something far different whenever they took the mantle of justice into passion and into a lack of definition, and that turned into a retribution in the hands of the angered. And this group called the Commission on Public Safety were the most vicious punishers that history has ever seen. Anyhow, I invite you to go look at the substance of the French Revolution. Robespierre, and I listen. It's the French, but anyhow, their traveling guillotine could not compare to what the American Revolution was setting up, and that was a system of government that was by the people for the people. And when we look at that traveling guillotine of the French Revolution, we see that the morally and intellectually superior people who think of themselves superiorly are arrogant as all get out, and they don't want separation of powers to slow them down at all. The idea of things aren't right, so we need the government to fix us, is really the first step towards hell that we can always make. And any kind of government that is a government by complaint is also an evil government. Government needs to be slowed down by the separation of powers and by the slow management of due process, fair trials, limited powers, checks and balances, all of these things. But when it comes to a certain group of people who I would say are focused on cosmic justice, they think of themselves as morally and intellectually superior to everybody else. I just call that arrogance. And they don't want anything to slow them down. And when you get justice managed by the angered group of people, it's never going to come out right. Unbridled government power is the habit of humanity, because humanity falls into the trap of thinking that government must fix all the problems that are observed in life. This is where the Bible steps in, because the Bible steps in to give us a very clear picture of God and how God's earthly justice is a justice of patience and slowness. We see that because God does not smote us on the spot. He does not throw lightning bolts at everybody who does a problem, or does something wrong. Earthly justice from a biblical point of view is very different than cosmic justice. And cosmic justice here on earth tries to get involved in fixing all past mistakes and being the final judge and arbiter of all things, picking its winners, picking its losers. And in this equation today, Joe Sixpack has no chance of coming out, in the cosmic justice minded out, with a fair trial or anything like that. And I would say that, today's social justice warriors, more than anything, need to be slowed down with their view of cosmic justice, because the Bible reminds us that we have limited abilities as human beings, that we ought to be very concerned about justice, yes, but we also ought to be very concerned about our abilities when it comes to justice, that we have no earthly power to really right all of the wrongs of history. We cannot do it. And that we have no right to demand perfection. We can aspire to doing things better, but we cannot demand perfection, because perfection amongst a very imperfect group of humanity is never going to be possible. Cosmic justice warriors, quite frankly, are too heavenly minded to do any earthly good. Biblical faith is about trusting God's justice and living under God's justice. God's mercy lets our bad justice go on, and also his patience allows us to keep making better forms of justice. And I do say, without without hesitation that what we have in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States is wildly different than what any other country has. And there have been many countries that have benefited by trying to bring in similar, ideas to what we, have brought up. And we didn't invent these ideas. These ideas came to us through the pages of history as corrections. And so today's cosmic justice warriors are actually taking us back in a step in time to a time where this widow meets up with an unjust, judge who has no fear of God and has no respect for humanity in its entirety. And I would say that there is never, ever going to be a way for justice to emerge unless God is in the conversation and a respect for man is in the conversation. And both of them need to be brought together, and we need to slow down and understand how imperfect we are. Biblical faith is ultimately about trusting God's justice and living under God's justice. God's mercy upon us is that he lets our bad ideas of justice go on so that we can keep making better corrections. And we have, and we've made great strides. I'm not, I'm not a boo bird. We've made great strides, but what I see is that those who think they can do cosmic justice here on earth, they're of no earthly good. And they're not even of any heavenly good either. Only God can do cosmic justice. Now, I know if you're a good listener, you're saying, Billy, man, that was quite a rant, because what's that? I mean, really, you got all that out of this little widow going before an unjust judge? I did, because it's a conversation about justice that we need to start having with one another, and we need to clarify. But here's the funny thing. It's Jesus that is bringing about this conversation and this parable about this, unjust judge who, merely gives in to the widow because he doesn't want to hear her talk anymore. He gives her justice, yes, but he gives justice only because of his own selfish needs. You know that old saying about the blind squirrel can find an acorn every once in a while. What Jesus is presenting to us is that if we understand that justice can happen amongst us humans sometimes, then how much more should we believe that justice happens with God? This story that Jesus brings to us is, according to his own mind, is to the effect that we ought to always pray and not lose heart. Now, that's pretty crazy to think about. This story of justice is so that we ought to always pray and not lose heart. How does a story about justice, relate to praying and not losing heart? Well, just like I said, justice drives us crazy because we see injustice happening all the time and all around, and we feel the effects of unjust behavior all around us. We hear it on the news, and then we experience it in life. Jesus knows that to be a human, you're going to experience injustice at some level, and it's going to drive you crazy. And you need to slow down and get a bigger view of justice. And you need to allow God to be in control of cosmic justice. Jesus assures his hearers, put your faith and your trust in God, who will always make the right decision. God will give you justice. The promise of justice is yours when you believe in God. When you actually trust God, you are trusting him and his justice, that there is nothing that he will let go. He is keeping track of all injustices in this world. He does not need you to act morally or intellectually arrogant with your society and take matters and your guillotine into your own hands. He needs you to slow down. He needs you to slow down and put your faith and your trust in him. And this is really what Jesus is calling our attention to. Prayer is not something you do at a meeting. Prayer is something that you do all the time. Prayer is something that you do on an everyday basis, and prayer is a reminder that you are serving and you are part of God, who is being patient with the world in which we live. I love, in the old portion of the Bible, when it is just as relevant as anything else we have in life. Micah chapter 6, verse 8. God has shown you, O man, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. Jesus/God knows that this world is characterized by a lack of justice. We get it right every once in a while. And if we can get it right every once in a while, how much more will God get it right all the time? Jesus goes on to say that when you put your trust in God, you get immediate justice. All things are right. Oh no, that does not mean all things are going to go well here on earth. Why? Because God himself is practicing his mercy upon us, and we ought to do the same. We cannot expect perfect justice. We should only work towards better justice. We ought to be mindful of justice, but just as we're mindful of justice, we need to be mindful of mercy. I got news for everybody. Cosmic justice warriors of today are the least merciful people I have ever heard of in my own lifetime. And we need to be very, very aware of that. To act justly, to love mercy, both of those things go hand in hand, because both of those things go hand in hand with God. We need to slow ourselves down and walk humbly with our God. Yes, we always need to be concerned at doing a better job with justice, but we need to be in continual prayer, in our continual humility before God, knowing that we ourselves, are incapable, and there is no human being that is capable of instituting some sort of perfect justice here on earth. That is what we are waiting for when the Son of Man comes back. And that is Jesus Christ, that is God. And that's what Jesus says. Will the Son of Man find faith? People trusting in God's justice, with God's mercy, while they're humbly walking with God here on earth. That is true for Jesus' own day and when Jesus returns. And when Jesus returns, that's what he's been talking about for the last 3 chapters in Uncle Luke here. When Jesus returns, this is the end. And all things will be handled with perfect justice. Not even cosmic justice. Cosmic justice, yes, but perfect justice, because only God is capable of such a thing. Well, that's what we got this week. Justice. What does God require of us? To act justly, to love justice and mercy, and walk humbly. Be humble. Catch you next time.